changing the world was not something that people just talk about, people actually do it. Very few people grow up thinking, I'd really like to clean dirty water. I had always grown up with respect and reverence for water. Moments happen. It's up to you to grab them and then do something about it. If your product can't solve it, invent or buy a different product. Great question, Eric. No one's asked that question.
So welcome to this episode of the Salty Water Podcast. Today we're going to focus on a major success story in the water industry. Gradiant was founded 13 years ago by two PhD students from MIT who had an idea and a technology to treat high salinity produced water in the Permian Basin. Their carrier gas extraction, or CGE technology, uses humidification and dehumidification to treat this aggressive waste stream. From this core initial technology, the company has grown significantly with successful rounds of fundraising, product diversity, geographic expansion, top line and employee growth. The range of technology offerings include PFAS treatment, counterflow reverse osmosis, and a lithium extraction process, among others. But all of these technologies seem to have one thing in common at the core, and that is innovation. My guest today is the co-founder of Gradiant, Anurag Bajpayee. Welcome, Anurag, to the Salty Water Podcast.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here.
So for those who've not followed your career, you were born in India, came to the States and graduated with a BS in mechanical engineering from the University of Missouri, then went on to earn an MS and a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT. Your research work at MIT, along with others, directly led to this CGE technology and the founding of the company in 2013. Let's start at the beginning of your journey. Did you have any experiences growing up in India or later at Missouri or MIT that shaped your passion for the water industry?
I can't actually allude to any direct experiences that led to me actively wanting to study water. However, as I became part of the water industry, first as a student and researcher, and then in the business, I realized why that was the case. So in hindsight, I had always grown up with respect and reverence for water. So this is what growing up in India and the background that I came from did for me. Water's a central theme in the sort of spirituality in India. You know, the river Ganges is worshipped as a goddess, for example. And that's not unique to India. If you think about water, go back to many ancient cultures, whether it's the Native Americans or the ancient Egyptians, even the ancient Chinese, of course, ancient Indian culture and traditions. Water was something that was supposed to be worshipped. Water was not treated as a commodity or just as a resource, but as something that is meant to be taken care of, that is an completely inseparable part of life and civilization. I never thought of all that until I actually came into running a water business. And later it came to me why everything lined up. So when I found the opportunity to study water for my PhD, I took it up and I was fortunately did well at it. And then when the opportunity to start the business in the water industry using the water technologies that Prakash and I were working on at MIT, why we took up that opportunity with full force, with full commitment, and why things went the right way, that deep down, that respect, reverence, and almost a subconscious recognition of the value of water played a role. So it sort of was roundabout. I didn't grow up with something actively realizing, oh, this is what I want to do. Very few people grow up thinking, you know what, I'd really like to clean dirty water.
So it's strong cultural and, we do see water is vital to survival and vital to human health. And so, interesting way to get around to it. So, segueing to MIT and this CG technology, how did you find it at MIT, and what did MIT do? Obviously, it's a great educational institution, but serving as an incubator for your entrepreneurial focus on trying to get something to the market.
So when Prakash and I came to MIT, so we arrived at MIT almost the same time. I think he was a few months after me. We both, and again, I didn't know at that time necessarily, but as I got to know Prakash while at MIT, we both are very practically oriented people. So even
Mhm.
though we were getting our PhDs, when I started at MIT, I wanted to be a professor. I think a place like MIT puts you in your place. When I got there, I realized there were far better professors than I could ever be. So I should focus on what I am best at. And the same thing with Prakash, he was also a very practically minded person. So what we were working on for our PhDs, we didn't want that to just advance within academia and in the scientific way, but rather be put to use in a way that created economic, environmental, and societal value.
Mhm.
And that combined with sort of the culture at MIT, which has always been a very practical culture, right? MIT was, in fact, founded not as a science school, but as an engineering school.
Oh,
Back in the mid 19th century when MIT was started, engineering wasn't really a thing, right? The
mhm.
Industrial Revolution was just
Yeah.
kind of taking off, and science was, physics, chemistry, the pure sciences was what everyone used to study. So MIT was founded as a practical institution. And I think that culture stands to this day, which is what has resulted in MIT becoming the breeding ground for so many startups that some of which ended up becoming very, very big companies, for examples for generations, really. So that combination of us being quite practically minded versus the environment at MIT that was very practical, that knew no bounds, I would say, there was no stupid question. Changing the world was not something that people just talk about and, write about in essays at MIT. People actually do it and you're
Yeah.
encouraged to do it. So that combination really catalyzed the formation of the company, and that entrepreneurial spark was given fuel by that MIT culture, I would say.
Where did you discover the Permian Basin produced water problem, and how did that get you into the?
Great question, Eric. No one's asked that question. I mean, people ask questions like you said, right? Why did you get into water, or why did you do your PhD on this specific topic? But where did you discover the Permian Basin opportunity? It's very interesting. So, Prakash and I were working on these technologies, as you noted, right? The carrier gas extraction, which is a uh, type of humidification, dehumidification concept. And just a little bit on that, by the way, humidification, dehumidification, as you very well know, obviously learns from nature, right? From the nature's rain cycle. So again, that same concept of learning from nature,
Okay.
holding nature close, having that respect and reverence for nature played a role in that. I was working on something very closely related to carrier gas extraction. So conceptually, we were working on the same thing. So we had already started thinking about putting these technologies to practical use by way of founding a company and starting a business. And actually, I in fact took a class at MIT where the goal was to put together people who were looking to solve real world problems into teams and then have them start companies. Now,
Okay.
the team that I worked with for that class, I never actually started a company with. But when I made a presentation on the water technology that Prakash and I were working on, one of the professors said, "Well, do you know anything about this produced water problem that we have all over Texas right now?" And
Yeah.
to be honest, I had no clue up until that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So finding that desperate market that
Yeah.
really needed something that we were working on, or something similar to what we were working on at least, then suddenly, we found that market. We were working on something. We wanted to commercialize it. So you just look for the path of
Okay.
least resistance, and that's where we went.
Yeah.
So again, in a way, serendipity, I was
Mhm.
happened to be in the right place at the right time. But serendipitous moments happen. It's up to you to grab them
Yeah.
and then do something about it.
For sure. I'm always been personally interested in the commercialization process. There's a lot of technologies that work well in the lab, work well at bench scale. And the oil and gas industry is generally considered pretty conservative. Yeah, this was a costly problem of produced water. But what was the process of weaving your way from the lab and bench scale actually into the field and commercialization and breaking into the oil industry? And what did that teach you about the business side of it, that experience?
The process of commercialization, I don't think it's, what I'm about to say isn't necessarily unique to the oil industry or the water industry, but it's about this almost missionary zeal to go and commercialize what you're working on, right? You
Mhm.
need to make people believe. So you have to, when missionaries go out and
Yeah.
convert people, they get them to believe. So so if you understand what the problem is, that's a great start. But you don't really understand until you go spend time in the field. So
Yeah.
that's what we did. We hit the ground. We showed up in Texas and North Dakota. We made friends with the field operators. We
Mhm.
really asked them questions, and we asked them what their problem was, what solution they were looking for, what would be an ideal scenario for them, what would
Yeah.
be an ideal cost for them. And of course, the ideal scenario is this, and the ideal cost is somewhere down there. That's
Right.
okay. You have to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
The ideal scenario has to come down, and the cost has to,
The
or
low.
the price that they're willing to pay has to go up.
Yeah.
And somewhere, the
Meet in the
two
middle.
cross, and that's okay. So there is no replacement to hitting the ground, getting your hands dirty, as they say, really listening to the customer.
Yeah.
I think what a lot of engineers and scientists, that the mistake that we tend to make is we get so attached to our product or our technology and think that we've solved the world's problems without taking the time or interest in listening to what it is that the customer really wants, right?
Mhm.
And you may have the absolute best product. They may not want the best product. They may
Right.
want something that works for
Yes.
them, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
someone comes to me and says, look, I stitch these fine three-piece suits made of Italian cloth.
Mhm.
Yes, sure, it's the best. I don't wear suits, so I'm not going to buy that, right? So
Right.
I think that listening and truly making the customer feel like you care, you're out to solve their problem. Of course, you're
Yeah.
out to make
Yeah.
money as well, but you're out to solve their problem first.
Yeah.
Gets you two things. One, it gets you what they need, so you can tweak your product to that. Number two, it builds that trust, it builds that relationship, which is so key, because the commercialization process is not without failures.
Yeah.
And you need the supporters when things don't go exactly right.
Yeah. Obviously, CGE was adopted, and you had a company now, a running business. But since then, you've grown tremendously and diversified, and you've had successful rounds of fundraising, top line growth, product and geographic expansion. that's a whole nother challenge to grow a business. There are a lot of one-trick ponies in the water technology business, but you've diversified and grown. And so what was the success behind that? How did you become an astute businessman and all the while building off of these technologies?
So I think, see, we started with, as you very well put it, Eric, we started with the carrier gas extraction technology. That was our flagship product in the beginning. Um, it was very good. It was actually uh, almost twice as efficient as the next best competition, which was MVR at the time,
Yeah.
in the oil
Okay.
field. Our customers said, look, guys, this is great. This is absolutely great. You're making fresh water from really contaminated water. Just the one problem, I don't always need fresh water.
Yeah.
I can live with water that is good enough to recycle.
Yeah.
So I'll use you 1 out of 10 times in my operations. For the other nine, let me go look for something else.
Yeah.
And so we took that as feedback and said, look, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
However, why don't you work with us? Let us build you that product that does the other nine sites as
Yeah.
well. Instead of you going and hunting, look, we built you
Yeah.
something here, which worked for you. Let
Yeah.
us build something else. So that actually became the selective chemical extraction, which was our second sort of line of solution. It's really a pre-treatment system,
Yeah.
which we developed, not necessarily any shift in science fundamentally, but it was a lot of incremental engineering innovations, and
Yeah.
incremental innovations, if you add 10 things that are 2% better and now you're 20% better, that's a big number in our
Yeah.
industry, as you understand.
Yeah.
So we developed that, and that kind of started this philosophy of listening to feedback from the field, pushing it back to the lab, and then
Yeah.
putting that positive feedback loop to constantly come up with new solutions. And
Mhm.
as you said, right, this industry has seen a lot of one trick ponies, to use
Mhm.
a not such a great term. That's just not the way to win in this water industry.
Right.
If you
Right.
really want to be the leader that we thought we could be, you have to provide an end-to-end solution to the customer.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, what happens if you don't, right? If you just sell a product or a single product, there is a middleman between you and the end user, and that
Mhm.
middleman might be a very large water company, which
Right.
may be slow and may not have the incentive to really change anything in terms of technology. So
Right.
if you want to control your destiny, you have to provide end-to-end solution. If you have to provide end-to-end solution, you have to have multiple differentiating technologies,
Yeah.
and you have to have the skills and the ability to combine those proprietary technologies with standard unit operations, pipes, pumps, RO membranes, UF. So we do all of that. We, based on what the customer needs in a particular project, we will pick and choose from our technologies, but then we combine with standard unit operations.
Yeah.
So we become, therefore, what we call a technology driven end to end water solution company. And
Okay.
that's how we're able to work with the end user.
So absolute customer focus, problem solving, and end to end service, kind of the triumph of
Because
your.
in the end, your goal as an entrepreneur, as a business person, isn't to I mean, your fundamental goal isn't to sell your product. It
Yeah.
is to solve the customer's
Problem.
problem. If
Right.
your product happens to solve it, amazing.
Great.
If
Great.
your product needs to change to solve it, well, so be it. If your
Yeah.
product can't solve it, well, invent or buy a different product,
Right.
So
Right.
that's the approach. It is the customer focus
Yeah.
that made that difference between being a one technology company or an end-to-end solution
Wow.
provider.
So what do you see as the future? You've got this tremendous platform. You're rolling along, and any additional challenges you see, or any focus on taking the company public at some point in time?
There's always challenges that, when you think you've fixed the challenges, the new one comes up, As long as there's a business, there's a challenge.
That,
As long as there's life, there's a challenge, right?
yeah,
Something or the other will keep presenting itself if you continue to move forward. If you
yeah.
stop, that's fine. Then now you're good. Now you're set. But Gradient, as you probably have seen and heard, Eric, continues to grow at very fast pace, is at scale. There's really no other water company that's growing at these,
Right.
sort of 50 to 100% a year type of growth rate, even when we have already close to $500 million in revenue.
Mhm,
The company is profitable.
mhm,
Company has been profitable multiple years now. So now,
mhm,
our focus a couple of years ago switched from just growing the top line to growing the bottom line
mhm.
and continuing to solve the customer's problem. All of that without losing our DNA, So what is that DNA? See, I said customer focus is key, but what makes the company in the end is our people, right? The culture of innovation, the culture of care. I still remember Prakash and I sitting with our very first investor at a TGI Fridays in Rochester.
Mhm.
And he asked us, he said, guys, what do you want to do? Do you want to build and flip, and sell the company, or do you want to run it forever? And our answer was, in 30 years, we still want the company to be running and we want to build a culture that people are proud of. Our employees should go tell their neighbors and friends, this is a badass company to work for. You should work for them too. And
Yeah.
if we get to that point, we've done something right, and I think to a large extent we have that. Our people really like being here. They talk well about the company. They go tell people good things about the company, which some of our best recruits come through existing team members.
Yeah.
So without losing that culture of that entrepreneurial, innovative culture, the culture of care that, this is really a Gradient family and we work super hard, but we justify that by telling us, reminding ourselves that what we do is so important, what we do is so critical.
Yeah.
So the challenge really is that, Eric, how the company continues to grow and become a bigger company in scale,
Mhm.
but without becoming the big corporate in
Democracy.
culture,
Yeah.
and it's not easy. I mean, I
Well,
won't say like it's a piece of cake to do that,
well,
because in the beginning when you have 10 people,
sure.
the founders talk to every one of those 10 people. They're your personal friends. It becomes a little harder when you're 100 people. It becomes much harder when you are over 1,000 people.
People.
Gradient
Yeah.
with 1,400 people at this point is
Yeah.
getting to that point where Prakash and I don't necessarily know every single person by name, right?
Yeah.
So how do we mitigate that is obviously by bringing other leaders in the company who sort of push that same culture and
Sure.
message and that ethos, that philosophy. Sometimes we've gotten it wrong. You don't get it right every single time.
Mm,
And,
mm.
you know, once in a while we do get some people who, may be very good, capable people in their own right, but they may not have fit in culturally and in that
Okay.
philosophy that Gradient is built upon. So that's the challenge, to continue to grow without losing our culture of
Core,
innovation
core
and
culture.
care.
Yeah. Generally, these podcasts are informative and not political in any way, but to me, there's a bigger story here, which is, I'm the son of an immigrant. You left your home country, you came here, you had the benefit of some of the greatest educational institutions. And through your entrepreneurship, you've solved real problems in the world. You've improved the environment. You've contributed to society. But how do you tell your story in terms of what the debate is in the country today? We are a country of immigrants, and that's our story. And so I'd just like to hear from you because you're living it. And how do you feel about what's happening in America today without having to be political? And if you don't want to answer the question, you don't have to answer the question. But I think this is the epitome of the American way of life is to come here, get educated, create value, serve society. And that's a good thing.
I mean, look, the sentiment around various topics, whether it's, I mean, immigration being one of those topics, tends to go up and down in this country.
Mhm.
Uh, is this as
Another
bad as
cycle.
it gets? No, I mean, US has been in very different
Yeah.
places in history in terms of public opinion about immigrants or even racial segregation and
Right.
so on,
Right.
right? So I don't think anyone can deny that. I mean, ever since the first immigrants landed in this country in many ways has been built by immigrants. But do challenges crop up every so often? Yes. And look, I am an optimistic person.
Mhm.
Some people say too optimistic sometimes, but if we weren't optimistic, we wouldn't have been able to build Gradient.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the society in the US has shown in the past the ability to correct itself. The look sentiments against anyone isn't great, right? Whether it's immigrants or anyone else, right? It's just anything that divides any society, whether it's the American society or the Indian society or the
Yeah.
European society, it's bad for the society, right?
Yeah.
When any group of people, any society, any people are stronger when they're united
Yeah.
and weaker when they are not united, right? Because then just by the way, same goes for companies. A lot of good companies fail when they start having internal problems, right?
Mhm.
Internal competition,
Right.
politics
Right.
happens. I mean, again, so we are so mindful of that. Going back to that point you asked earlier, is what are the challenges, right? So US is a very big country, biggest economy, big country. So it also starts having problems of when system gets too big.
Mhm.
There are so many different
Upstream.
factions that one doesn't see the other one in the best light.
Right.
I do believe, however, most people are good people, and
Mhm.
their hatred or opposition to the other, whatever that other is, can often come from ignorance and misinformation rather than out of malignancy of their heart.
Yeah.
So look, it's not the best sentiment in the US, but it's been there before.
Yeah.
Even when shortly after I started the company, I was at a panel at MIT, which was for immigrant entrepreneurs. And, this is 2014, 15. Arguably, one would say, well, that was a great time for immigrants and sentiments around immigration and so on. Um, but someone asked me questions like, oh, I don't, I'm a foreign student. It's so hard for me to get a green card. That's why I cannot start the company. I'm really struggling. I get it. But my answer was, look, man, if you can figure out how to build a successful business from nothing, surely you can figure out how to get a green card, and
Yeah.
that is true. And that is still true, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
But it will-
challenges come, but we have to take them head on and move
yeah.
past them.
Well, that's a perfect ending because you've done that certainly, I'd say, your entire adult life, taken on challenges and I take my hat off to you. I've been around the water industry a long time, and I don't think I can really remember anything quite like Gradient, the way it was formed, what you've done with it. So my hat's off to you, and thank you so much for spending some time with me on the Salty Water Podcast.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you also for your kind words. Thank you for covering this story. And thanks for starting this podcast. I look forward to seeing other episodes of this as well.